The trees were called Juniperus ashii in 1932. That's one of the reasons why has taken a long time for a lot of people to still call it ash juniper, because mountain cedar was used for so many decades, before it was called Juniperus ashii. So one of the earlier names, Juniperus mexicana, is still being used, like over in Uvalde, Lakey area, over by Garner State Park, that whole region still calls it Juniperus mexicana. There are a few ancestral relic populations called Juniperus ovata, and there are more ancestral populations. One's located near New Braunfels, but they were discovered by Dr. Robert Adams. The general perception is that they grow mostly as large bushes. Now, I know that I am speaking to the Native Plant Society that's a little more well-versed and knowledgeable about native plants, and so you may not have that perception, but when I first moved to Austin 20 years ago and joined the Native Plant Society, I thought they were bushes. That's all I ever knew them as. Here, hold on, I'm trying to figure out how to advance the screen. There we go. Mountain cedars have been accused of many things: that they cause erosion, choke oaks, that they're invasive, they kill understory plants, they form monocultures, among other things. But most of all, they're accused of being water hogs. And where are mountain cedars found? They range from North Mexico to southern Missouri. They're most abundant in the Texas Hill Country. Specifically, I like to clarify, I'm talking about the eastern part of the Edwards Plateau. Some agencies like Texas Parks and Wildlife, a lot of times will call the entire Edwards Plateau the Texas Hill Country, but that's not correct. It's just the eastern portion of the Edwards Plateau. Mountain cedars grow mostly on top of limestone bedrock called karst. And to the left there, the medium gray color shows the general distribution of mountain cedars from northern Mexico all the way up to southern Missouri, as well as all the other junipers that grow in Texas. And the middle bottom map there shows what I'm talking about. That's the little stars there indicates the general outline of the Texas Hill Country, as it should be. What is karst? Now, real quickly, remember I said that mountain cedars grow on top of limestone bedrock called karst. Karst is extremely porous, fractured bedrock that holds groundwaters and produces artesian and gravity springs. And that's where you get your caves, your sinkholes, all these things that we know about. What we don't always know about it really is how they form. And karst forms when carbonic rocks, such as limestone, are exposed to carbonic acid. Now that is carbon plus rainwater. So when the rainwater falls down, picks up atmospheric carbon, hits the ground, and then can enter into the ground to help dissolve the limestone. The more porous and fractured the karst, the more water it can hold. So as that carbonic acid goes into the limestone, it starts to create all the pockets and fissures and little cavities, and over about a million years, caves. Karst groundwaters are available for human use. As populations grow, concern has grown over water supplies, and this has led to water conservation efforts and finding ways to increase water supplies. So back to the mountain cedar. Remember I said I thought it was just a bush. So when I first started, my research, everyone kept saying, why are you writing why are you doing this? Why are you researching? Why are you thinking about writing a book on a bush? And I didn't really have an answer until I discovered my first one. It was over in the Barton Greenbelt, in Austin. So I took the picture. There it is on the left there. And I was like, what is this? I wasn't exactly sure. I was still kind of a new native plant person. Got some leaves, got a little twig, took it into the Native Plant Society. They all gathered around me. They said, no, that's ash juniper, mountain cedar. I was like, what? And so I started talking to arborists and city officials saying, these can get really big. And everyone kept telling me, oh, that's an anomaly. They only a few get that big. That's not their real form. They're really meant to be bushes. In fact, there's so many native plant books that identify that you key out and all that. Was it Marshall and Johnston? I think, you know, the manual vascular plants. They all say, oh, the tree is, you know, like a large bush, doesn't get more than 20 feet tall. Some people might say 20 feet, 25 feet tall. But then I found another big one and another and another. And as word got out that I was studying the trees, people came forth to tell me that they also had these big mountain cedars. And I mean, without email, I don't think I could have done this. People were sending me pictures of their large mountain cedars. Pam Lenhart, who is in this group, she sent me a picture of hers just last week. And I started to realize, wait a minute, this is not an anomaly. They're everywhere. And that is because historically, mountain cedars existed as trees, not bushes. Tree mountain cedars were historically very common. Where they grew, springs were reported to be abundant. This is because the old growth mountain cedar cover, like all old growth wooded areas, protects healthy soils and karst function. The same was true wherever you had established late successional prairie grasses. They too were helping to protect the soil and the karst. But the trees did a better job of protecting the karst where the soils were more shallow, less than 18 to 24 inches. And that's something that I discuss a lot in my book. And I realized that that's just not a hill country thing. That occurs around the world. Everywhere soils are shallow over karst, a wooded area is better on top of those conditions. And I get a lot more into that in my book as to why. So the pictures we're looking here are two old growth juniper oak woodlands. And these are bona fide old growth. This here is a regenerating cedar brake. A lot of people, they think when they look at, see all the bushy cedars, those big old thickets, they're like, oh, look, all the cedar brakes. I'm like, no, that's not a cedar brake. Those are cedar thickets. They're totally different. This is a cedar brake. And they consisted of, they were old growth forest, not woodlands, not savanna or anything, forest, with large, tall mountain cedars. And a few remnant patches can be found today. This one, like I said, is regenerating and is growing on a property that I managed just east of Dripping Springs. So the hill country had lots and lots of these taller, older mountain cedars and taller, older trees. Even the bald cypress trees were massive, 12 to 15 foot diameter trunks. I think one was even reported to have an 18-foot diameter trunks. Everything was gigantic. The escarpment black cherries, 8 to 9 foot diameter trunks. I saw one time a twisted, warped black, or was it Arizona walnut, in a ravine that could not be accessed. It had about 9 foot diameter trunk. The trees were all huge, including the mountain cedars. On the left-hand side there is a picture of mountain cedars being used as telephone poles, and in the 1800s. And right there, the picture of the train, that's near Llano. And that's when they were building a train tracks out to reach Llano. And you can see in the middle there in the foreground, those are mountain cedar ties that were used to build railroads everywhere. And as you can see there, Austin Daly, Democratic statesman, I think the date on this is about 1872, wrote, "The cedar tie business has largely contributed to the growth and prosperity of the Hill City, which is Austin, in the last 2 years, more especially the last 12 months. 200,000 cedar ties have been shipped from this city," and that is just reporting from Austin. But the problem with what was going on is that you not only had this massive clear cutting to provide the needs of to provide poles for these new inventions of, you know, telegraph, telephone, railroad, barbed wire, you know, fence posts, all these things happened all at once. You know, it's the boom and all these inventions, and created a massive demand for mountain cedars. But at the same time, and my book gets a lot more into the why of how all this happened. And at the same time, there was a massive overstocking of the ranges. That picture there on the left was taken near Fisher. And, excuse me, and I think the date on that is about 1870 or so. So the ranges were overstocked. There was also overburning. A lot of people say that the settlers stopped the fires. I'm like, no, they did not stop the fires until about 1900s. They were burning every year. Sometimes some areas were being burned twice a year. And the result on the right is that the vegetation that had the, you know, late successional dense grass cover, the old growth forest and woodlands were wiped out. And the hill country has been attempting to recover ever since. After that first wave of erosion and degradations, that's when the bushy mountain cedars began to spread to fix the problem. I mean, that's what they're actually doing. They're not being invasive. They're acting as a pioneering species. And that's because the old growth wooded areas and prairies could not recover. In many cases, especially like that picture on the right, the mycorrhizal fungi network had just, you know, been destroyed and could not support a more advanced, you know, climate level of plants. So they needed early succession species. And mountain cedars morphed from trees into bushes that could spread, drop tremendous amounts of organic matter. So they are dropping lots of organic matter. They're also, their canopy shades and reduces impact of the rain. You know, if you look out there and you say, oh, look, we don't have any mountain cedars, look how great it looks. Well, walk through that grassland and look down and tell me how many rocks you see. Everything is so rocky and barren. There is no soil. And just because you have cleared it off or burned it off, and now you get this nice little thin layer of grass, that doesn't mean it's been restored. Those grasses are still struggling, and they do not have they're not substantial enough to outcompete the woody vegetation. So therefore the woody vegetation will keep coming in, because the whole goal that nature's trying to do is increase the amount of organic matter. And mountain cedars, especially the bushy ones, provide a plethora of organic matter with the, you know, the just constant leaf fall that is slightly acidic to help balance out the pH of the limestone. You know, they're messy trees, so they're dropping stuff, they break in winds, you know, they die in droughts. But these bushy pioneering mountain cedars are getting organic matter back into the ground, and their roots also stabilize the soil. Their trunks direct, you know, rain to the base of the trees. That's why woody plants in general do so good on these degraded rangelands. It's because they're like, you know, mega soil building machines. Something that's interesting though is that a lot of studies have shown that more rainwater infiltrates into the soil under mountain cedars than under surrounding grass cover. Now, a lot of these studies, granted, have been looking at your more degraded sparse grass, not late succession, dense, you know, prairie grasses, you know, just real thick that you can barely get through them. They also, these bushy cedars, as they start to grow, they jumpstart the fungi network. And by reactivating the network, just this fungi network kind of starts off as arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. and they go dormant and they're just sitting there when the soil gets, degraded and dried out. But as more and more organic matter is worked into the soil and they got the shade and, you have that funneling action from the mountain cedars over time. Now, how long this takes could be decades, could be 100 years. Pretty long time for us, not for nature. And you're going to see, if you're looking, the picture on the upper left-hand corner shows an example of what this mycorrhizal fungi network looks like. And it attaches to roots and extends out through the soil to increase the ability of plants to take up nutrients and water and all that stuff. The picture on the left, that's called lady's fingers. That is the type of mushroom that comes with the arbuscular fungi. The picture on the left, that with the typical mushrooms with the caps, that is indicates a more advanced, I guess you could say, type of mycorrhizal fungi that will then be activated as other trees such as oaks start to grow. But the oaks can't grow until there's some kind of fungi that has been activated. So they wait for for that to be activated. Okay. Now, what all this does is, as these bushy cedars are spreading out and growing the roots down, dropping organic matter, jump-starting the mycorrhizal fungi, so this increases groundwaters over time. The better the soil, the better it can protect karst porosity. And the better the soil, the more it can support late succession dense vegetation needed to increase karst porosity. The picture there on the left shows a trench that was cut. See, a lot of times, a lot of the research that's come out, like in the 1990s, a lot of the really negative research about mountain cedars was not looking at the big picture. For instance, with water use, they were looking at one tree, literally a single tree was looked at, mountain cedar, and then a single live oak. And it was, the purpose of that study was just to kind of get a ballpark idea of how to do the study. The scientist, Dr. Keith Owens, has told me that his research paper was never meant to be taken as gospel. And that's the one that talks about 33 gallons of water per day, water use. And that's the one that tags the mountain cedar as a water hog. Yet follow-up research that he has conducted since then has shown that not only was that an unusually high amount of water use, but that live oaks across the board are using more water. And what they discovered is because the karst is so varied, it goes up and down, it's more fractured in areas, you got sinkholes. You can't look at the water use of one tree and say, oh, that's our answer, and walk away. You can't do that. I mean, we got, ravines, you got hillsides, everything is different. So the water use, instead, they decided, okay, we can't be looking at single trees. It doesn't matter. We have to look at entire stands of trees. That's where they're getting a lot better information. Also, by going down, cutting these trenches and digging down to see what is actually going on underneath. And to their surprise, at the top there, you can see those roots. This is underneath a bushy thicket of mountain cedar. Now, if you look in the background there where the ladder is, there's no bushy cedars. Look how solid the limestone is there. Do you see the difference between that and what's underneath the bushy cedars? It's not fractured or anything, but under the bushy cedars, it's very fractured, it's very porous. And therefore, the research doing this found that groundwater was moving remarkably fast. It's like lots and lots of water movement under these mountain cedars. So we need to let the thickets do their job. These pioneering thickets of bushy cedars have been working hard to restore hill country soils and karst to increase groundwaters. We need to let them do their job and adopt sustainable solutions that work with them to restore both wooded areas and prairies. We also need to identify and conserve conserve regenerating and old growth tree mountain cedar cover whenever possible, so that may continue to protect soils and karst. And, you know, as someone who has, you know, as an environmental planner, I have been out there so many times with developers, with contractors and everything. And they've been told mountain cedars are bad. They literally think they're doing everybody a favor by cutting down these trees, no matter how large they are. And I mean, just last week, I discovered a pile of 12 to 18-inch diameter mountain cedar trunks, more than 30 of them, stockpiled in the middle of Zilker Botanical Garden. And obviously that was done because someone had been told that they're bad trees, you know? One thing that we can do is this picture on the left there shows what's called a contour swale. And basically it's a shallow ditch that follows contour lines. So it stays at the same elevation as it moves along a hillside or anything. So this one was constructed through a pioneering thicket of bushy cedars to give them a boost, to help give nature a helping hand. So instead of fighting the trees, you're working with the trees. You know, you're maximizing what they've done, and that the berm there is covered with about 2 inches thick of the mountain cedar that was shredded as that trench was constructed. And, you know, like out in areas that have deeper soils that would be better as prairies, you can do more of these, you know, and do more clearing where the soils are deeper, the slopes are more gentle, like more rolling. Contour swales is something that really needs to become mainstream and applied throughout the hill country. In the 1930s, when the Civilian Conservation Corps was doing some work in the hill country, they did install a few systems called contour trenches. A lot more difficult. They were deeper. They were 3 to 4 feet deep. So it was definitely harder to install that in the hill country, especially on these shallow soils. But we don't need it. They don't need to be that deep. And plus, when they're that deep, sometimes they don't drain fast enough and you get, you know, mosquitoes. So these swales, you know, these shallow ditches, the water in there is probably about no more than 18 inches deep. And within 3 to 4 days, it has soaked into the ground. I mean, basically, these are linear detention ponds, because once you get that water into the ground, it's going to carry with it that carbon. And so it can start soaking down to increase limestone dissolution, to increase karst porosity that then increases groundwaters. You know, the solution to date has been, oh, just get rid of all the plants to get more runoff. And that is why so many landowners are out there clearing out all the woody plants, because they've been told that the only way that's the way to do things, and that's what they get funding to do, is to clear out the woody stuff so that more water runs off into the rivers. But it's ridiculous, because most of the water that recharges aquifers and our groundwaters comes from the ground, of water that soaks into the ground. Anyway, so these are all points just to be aware of. Please ask questions if you have any comments or anything you'd like to refute anything that I said. Just be bold, speak up.
How accessible is your book to the lay reader? If do you have to be a heavy scientist to be able to understand it, or is it pretty? I'd love to read it, but it might be over my head.
No, okay. So no, I wrote the book. Yes, it's almost 600 pages, so it's long. I have a lot of pictures, first of all. I wrote it in such a way that both the academic could appreciate it and that the layperson can understand it. I've had a lot of people, I mean, Bill Neiman with Native American Seed, and he said he was thinking the same thing. Oh my gosh, it's going to be so overwhelming. And I wrote it to have more like a conversational tone. You know, it's like, and it kind of leads you through different things. Sometimes I interject some stories, but for anyone overwhelmed by a single chapter, my bottom line, which is a series of bullet points at the end of each chapter, summarize the main points. And so I set it up literally in such a way so that like the first, like if you open up, you have a chapter, you can read the chapter heading, read like the first thing, and just even reading the section headings, just read that. But a lot of people have just sat down and have read this book remarkably fast. And, and because the fact that it does have lots of pictures, you know, and it has some really fascinating pictures that if I had published this book, you know, 15 years ago, before so many old historical photos were, you know, digitized and put onto the internet, I would not have been able to include them. You know, the picture like in the railroad being built, it just blows my mind. I love looking at old pictures like that. And granted, my book is not as high quality as looking at it, you know, on the computer in full color and all that, but it's you should be able to get through it. I mean, don't expect to get through it in, you know, 3 nights. It took Bill Neiman, I think he said 3 weeks. That was just reading it for a few hours each night.
It seems like David Bramberger started preaching the gospel of how important it was to get rid of the cedar, and you know, he has created what a lot of people consider to be this wonderful model out in the hill country about showing that if you get rid of the cedar, all the grasses come back and the springs start flowing again. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I know David. First of all, when I talk to him directly, he says he will tell me that he never, ever, ever said get rid of all the cedar. Never. That is what reporters are saying, he said. And he has even written a few rebuttals against that. And I mentioned that in my book, you know, that he has never, ever, ever said that. But I do go into explaining, and it's probably one of the things that befuddled me for a few years, was this idea that he said, oh, I cleared my springs and they flood. Well, first of all, clearing doesn't create springs. It just simply exposes them. And when you do remove the vegetation, you take away all water use. So then, yes, you can see the springs. But within 3 to 5 years, as David will admit, and other water studies have shown, within 3 to 5 years, all that savings goes away. And so you're kind of stuck in this endless loop of having to continue clearing and clearing and clearing and clearing. And while what David has done has been remarkable, is so much better than what has been done, it's time now to take it a step further and to really bring in more science that has been discovered. I mean, when David first bought his property, none of this newer research was available. He was using what he had, you know, but if you talk to him in person, he'll admit that, you know, he'll say, yeah, we did screw up. He'll say, like, we should never have used the bulldozer. You know, it's things like that, a lot of what, but, you know, he's a marketing guy, so he knows how to market himself and has his, you know, his brand. But he definitely started people heading in the right direction. But again, he never, ever said that. Can you tell us a little bit more about the research on cedar roots interactions? Lisa O'Donnell with the Wildlands Division, City of Austin, you know, the Back Canyons Canyonlands Preserve, has been doing a lot of that research. So contact her to get some more information on that. It's still new research, and it's just kind of starting up. More research has been done elsewhere, but already, you know, like for instance, they have research that shows that the white shin oak, you know, the scaly bark oak, was it Quercus biloba, that they have been able to prove that it needs the arbuscular fungi in order to start growing. that if that is not present in the soil, that it can't grow. But the mountain cedar can grow. It's like you have arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which is your more primitive, I guess you could say, more basic one. And that's the one that mountain cedars, as junipers, are able to do. I think that a lot of conifers can help that, work with that. The oaks and the other trees, they need the more, I guess you could say, more fancy mycorrhizal fungi. So they can jumpstart that, but they can't do that until the arbuscular gets going. It's very, very complex, but contact Lisa O'Donnell with the city. He's really digging into that and can be really helpful. Next one is Cynthia Alexander wrote, do eastern red cedars, I assume, also work to recharge the aquifer in the same way? I don't know because I didn't study them, but eastern red cedars, it's any woody tree that grows on karst geology can recharge the aquifer, because any of them are going to be able to increase limestone dissolution. My point here is that we've lost that ability because the soil karst has become so degraded that the bushy mountain cedars are helping to pioneer and jumpstart that. So I would assume yes, although eastern red cedars, I don't know if they really grow on limestone so much as the mountain cedars. I don't really know. Wrote, I have read the whole book and found it fascinating, not all difficult. Okay. Congratulations. Oh, how do you tell the difference between mountain cedar and eastern red cedar? I've had a lot of arguments on that one. Remember I showed you the slide and I said this is a regenerating cedar break. There's a lot of people that will say, no, those are eastern red cedars. Those are not mountain cedars. Mountain cedars can't look like that. And that is what is so wild also, is that not only can they look like a bush, but they can also look like a ponderosa pine tree. And so how do you tell? Well, I can tell the glance because I've been looking at them for 20 years. That's all I've been eating and drinking and sleeping, mountain cedars. So I can just look, I'm like, no, that's that. And it comes down to subtleties of branching patterns, bark, and things like that. And of course, if one is pollinating during, mountain cedar season, then that's a telltale sign. But the easiest way to do it anytime is to get foliage and look at it underneath a high, I don't know here it is. You have to use a little digital microscope. This is about 200 times magnification. You get that and you look at the leaf edges, and you know how they have like the little scaly leaves. You have to look at the scale. Each scale is a leaf. And you look at it. If the edge is smooth, entire, that's eastern red cedar. If it's toothed or serrated, that's a mountain cedar. Bam, every time. So that's how I've been able to tell a lot of people that. And so for instance, when I showed a picture of an old growth juniper oak woodland, there was actually some eastern red cedars in there. I walked in, I'm like, oh, wow, this is like eastern red cedars. Got leaf samples, went back to confirm, yes, they were, while the rest of them were mountain cedars. So there's some areas where they actually blend together. Are ash junipers considered native to this area? Fuck yes. When I first moved to the hill country, I joined the Native Plant Society, became a native plant evangelist and all that. And then I was told when I was working at a landscape architecture office that they're not native. And I'm like, what? And I found out that the city of Austin had written in their environmental criteria manual, under all the tree species and everything, they indicated that the mountain cedars are not native. That environmental criteria was then copied and distributed to every city and town throughout the hill country, so they all have the same information. That's one of the reasons why people don't think it's native, but it's native. It's been here. They have 10,000-year-old pollen that shows it's been here for quite a while. It's more native than we are, so it's very native. Yes. Deborah Youngblood wrote, I read that mesquites are huge water hoggers in comparison to ash juniper. Is that correct? I don't think any plant really is a huge water hog. The main thing is to get people to understand we need to stop looking at the individual tree use. It really doesn't matter if, unless someone was to go out and produce a study of like 1,000 mesquites in that area, all on the grid, and come back and then show, and every single tree will have a different water use. The thing is that mesquites, along with live oaks, both can grow their roots deeper, about 60 to 65 feet deep down. And ash junipers can only go down 25, maybe 30 feet. And that's why live oaks, whenever I see those really tall live oaks, especially in the middle of a drought that don't look stressed at all, you know they've accessed cave waters. Same with mesquite trees. But the mesquites are not as common on limestone. They really don't like the limestone. So I didn't really look at the mesquite's water use. But I think that the bigger answer there is that we need to stop looking at individual water uses and look at entire stand across a wide section of land. And it's going to change everywhere it goes, depending upon, you know, conditions underneath the ground. Twilight Grace wrote, Jim O'Donnell's swells, it's actually swales, are swell out. They call them bioswales, and I've tried to argue with them, saying those are not bioswales. They're contoured swales. Bioswales are a little bit different. And I just know because I've designed and installed some. So bioswales are things more that you're going to find in an urban context, like around, you know, streets and stuff like that. But it's okay. They can call it what they want. Lisa H wrote cemeteries. They're mowed underneath, so it's not the whole cedar ecosystem, but some very, very large trees. Yes, one of the very first large mountain cedars I found was in the Kyle Skyview Cemetery. And I was driving to go check out the Kyle Cabin, which is one of the last remaining dog trot homes. And it's made out of mountain cedars, old posts that, you know, they're, you know, 12 inches by 16 feet. You know, it's like, how was that possible if they're all bushes? And I was driving down the road and I was like, out of the corner of my eye, that's all I'm thinking about. I see it. I'm like, oh my God. And I back up. And sure enough, that one, its canopy width is about 45 feet wide and has a trunk diameter of about 40 inches wide. So it's a big one. So that's my first giant one to find. And then, and that was in a cemetery. Because, and a lot of that has to do with the culture, like European culture of cemetery trees, you know, that junipers are evergreen and represent everlasting life. And so they were always planted or retained in cemeteries. So that's why cemeteries were one of the first places I started looking when I was trying to find the big ones. I think that's, oh, okay, we got some more here. Allie wrote, are there any efforts you know of to better protect ash junipers across the hill country legislatively? It's pretty disheartening. I know. I am working with the Hill Country Alliance Conservation Network for developers. It's about 8 of us, and we're brainstorming what can we do. And the first step we're going to be doing is we're going to put together like a short video and a presentation and do a Zoom conference with and try to get as many politicians and legislative kind of people onto the meeting to get the ball rolling in this direction, not just with Mountain Cedars, but it's just clear cutting in general. So that's one thing I'm involved with. My just doing this book has my effort. Bill Neiman with Native American Seed has basically fallen in love with my book, and I'm so amazed. And he is promoting it to everyone. So he's covering the whole Junction area out there in the Western Hill Country. He's making everyone he meets, every landowner, everyone read the book. So I'm like building my army. And then I have Steve Nelly, who used to be with the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. And he is out there spreading the word too. So it's kind of like an underground movement, a grassroots movement, but the momentum should start to build. It's the biggest thing, that the reason I'm part of this developer group with the Hill Country Alliance is because there are a lot of developers that, like I said, literally think they're doing the right thing. They're because they've been told since about 1992 that aquifers are mostly recharged in stream and river cracks. And when I first moved here in 1996, that's what I was taught. I was told that's where the recharge happens. And then finally, Nico Howruth with some other people, he gained access to more advanced technologies, these eddy covariance towers that I do show a picture of in my book and discuss briefly, is and it looks at entire stands of trees. And they have found that let's see, what is it? I'm trying to remember. It's like 25 to 30% of rain that falls soaks into the ground to recharge aquifers. Now, I don't know what the percentage that falls into sinkholes, directly recharges, but it'll be higher probably. But only about 5% comes from the cracks in rivers and streams. So if you're clear cutting and therefore causing the soil and the karst to become compacted, increasing runoff, you have just decreased the amount of water recharging aquifer, and therefore that information needs to get out to developers. We do need to get that information out, because every time that they do their, clear cutting, what I call land scraping, they're taking away not just the vegetation, but the soil. And they're scraping all the way down to get, all that porous rock, that karst, they're getting rid of all of that. And I have some pretty horrible pictures in my book that shows what's going on. And anyone who's been driving around like Spicewood, Lakeway, Lago Vista, Jonestown has seen it. Also north of San Antonio, that whole area, a lot of areas along I-10. I think Kerrville's now starting to get some of that. And they go down to where it's just flat. Oh, and then there's this company out there who says, oh, we'll come along, and they have rock grinders that are left over from quarry operations. They go out there on people's properties and have taught them that, hey, we can come and grind up all that surface rock and everything down and make it, just pulverize it. So they go in, they destroy whatever soil has starting to gather, and it looks like a parking lot. And they're saying, oh, this is how we're supposed to be doing it. And then you have other contractors out there who are saying, oh, we want to look clean. The word clean has become real popular. And we will come and yank all those mountain cedars by the roots. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like, no. Because as you can imagine, that just utterly destroys not just the soil, but the karst and everything. But again, people, they think they're doing the right thing. And it's like it's all over the place. Where do you start? I don't know if anyone's ever seen on Central Texas Gardener, I did a little tiny segment called, I can't remember what it's called, but it's about using gravel, about gravel scaping. How a lot of people are doing gravel scaping in their yards, is to teach people why that is not a good decision. And I don't know, maybe, and it got out to a lot of people, and a lot of people were listening. So maybe I just need to get on there and do another episode. That might be another way. So anyway, it is disheartening. Yes, I agree. Celeste wrote, many of the mountain cedars in Austin are East red cedars. Generally, yes. Yeah, of course, because these red cedars, they like the sandy soils, they like the black clays and all that. So that's where you're going to find them. But there is overlap, like Red Bud Island. There's a little bit overlap, which is near Barton Springs Pool. There's in Oak Hill, a little bit overlap, and in North Austin, I found also some overlap. Oh, what plants or bushes have a symbiotic relationship when grown under juniper canopy? Symbiotic can be defined in different ways. There are some orchids. Some of the orchids I listed in my book appear to literally, they need to have the junipers. They're old growth juniper, not pioneering thickets. But anyway, it is an excellent nursery tree. And of course, the fact that it jumpstarts things. But as orchids are the only one that I've come across that have more of a symbiotic relationship.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much again for doing the presentation. It was really, really interesting.